Well, hello, welcome. My name is Richard Eng. This is a webinar that we are covering the really important topic of abortion. And I do these monthly webinars to equip you to understand the times and live faithfully as a witness of Christ. And so this month, wanted to tackle something really important. And as I mentioned, thinking through the pro-life issue, it came front of mind again because the state where a lot of my family's from, Minnesota, just last week passed a bill that they now allow abortion on babies up till the moment of birth, and so full term. So this continues to be just a really important cultural conversation as both sides become more polarized, right? So for us, the goal is to tonight to be able to share how to defend the pro-life position, but not strictly from using the Bible. Of course, I believe that the Bible is authoritative and it certainly speaks to this issue. But to people who don't take the Bible as authoritative, they're not going to find arguments from the Bible to be persuasive in any way, right? And so, though we can use the Bible in conversation, want to also think through how we can be tactful and mindful of where other people are coming from in their worldview, right? And so, rather than going in that direction, I'm bringing on a friend of mine. His name is Micah Kunkle, and he's had the opportunity to be on a few Jubilee videos. If you're familiar with them, those are very often just they bring two sides of a debate together, and it's always fiery and get the popcorn out, right? But it
Yes.
gets lots of clicks. So really, I'm grateful to have you on, Micah.
Yeah. Thanks for talking with me, Richard. It's a pleasure, man.
Yeah, it's good. So
Yeah.
before we dive into the topic, just want to give you the chance to introduce yourself a bit more and share the background. How'd you get on these videos that some have millions and millions of views?
Yeah. So I had been watching Jubilee for a while now, for several years. And I had always been interested in their middle ground series where they kind of get four people from opposing sides and they have several prompts and then they talk about it. So I've always kind of wanted to get into those videos, and particularly because I also saw like people get selected for those videos and then do such a poor job of articulating my side that I was like, I've got to get in one of these videos. So um, underneath the description of their videos, they have always put like, hey, do you want to be in a video? Sign up for our email list. So I signed up for their email list. I actually got into a video before where I was asking an Antifa member questions. So it wasn't like a debate format, but so that was my actually first Jubilee video I did. And then after that, I was in their system. And when you fill out the application, you put down like, that you're a male, that you're a Christian, that you're married, different things like that. And you put in your demographics so that, casting directors have that information on hand. And so that they can reach out to you about episodes that you'd be in. And so I put down that I was conservative. And so then I got an email from a casting director saying, hey, I think you might be interested in this video. It's a new series that we're doing called Surrounded. And we're having one, liberal in the middle, 20, surrounded by 20 conservatives. And so I applied, I did an interview with them, and then got an email that I got in. And then, yeah, that's how I got onto the Jubilee episode. And it was a new series. So it was kind of new for everyone. I didn't know what to expect. I had assumed it would get a few thousand, a few 100,000 views, because that was kind of pretty standard for Jubilee at that point.
Right.
I did not expect it would be seen by like 20 million people or anything
Right.
like that. So that was kind of a surprise, but it was awesome. It was great news. So
Yeah. So the unique thing about this format is, like you said, you've got one person who disagrees with the 20 or so surrounding them, and they'll introduce a prompt, and then multiple or one person will race to the chair on the other side of the table, the person in the
Yeah.
middle, and it kind of ends up being this almost like musical chairs moment for a second.
Yeah.
But then it turns to one-on-one conversation,
Hmm.
and usually that lasts a few minutes before the person in the middle gets voted out, and then you switch.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's how it works. And on the chairs things too, it's funny if you compare the one that Charlie Kirk did and the one that Dean did, and just how the conservatives treated each other when it came to running to the chair. I think there's a big difference in how we treated each other. Um, I think overall we were pretty respectful to each other, whereas the woke college students, as Jubilee put
Right.
it, were
Yeah.
pushing each other to get into
Yeah,
the
it
chair.
looked like they were about to
It
throw a
was
punch
pretty
at each other
brutal.
to get the chance. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
intense.
yeah,
Yeah.
but great
So, okay, so
entertainment.
tell me
Great
about,
entertainment.
yeah, when you were across the table with like a dean or, these different people,
Mhm.
kind of coming to our topic for the evening on pro-life, and you were in other videos too, not just the Surrounded series.
Yeah.
Um, what what were some of the things that you were hearing as far as why someone would take the pro-choice position? And we can start to kind of maybe steel man at that point, and then start to move into how to articulate the pro-life view.
Yeah, so I had done multiple different pro-life trainings. Um, one through Scott Klusendorf, and he's a good friend of my dad's. They worked together at Stand to Reason, and then just a good friend. And so I had listened to plenty of his talks and his training. And then, secondly, through my college group that I attended here in Southern California, led by Tim Thetford. And Tim Thetford's a good family friend as well. And he has done multiple abortion series at the college group, training us to then go out to the Irvine Spectrum and have conversations on abortion. And so through that, I was exposed to a lot of the typical pro-choice arguments. And I think Scott Klusendorf puts it well, of all of the pro-choice arguments kind of fall under that acronym of SLED, as I brought up in the Jubilee video, which stands for size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. All the arguments either fall under one of those categories. And so, yeah, every single pro-choice argument I've ever heard that falls under one of those four.
Right. And
Yeah.
usually the pro-choice position is to dehumanize or depersonhood, or how in some way redefine the unborn as just not worthy of dissent or of respect or dignity, or these different things, or certainly
Yeah.
value. That's why you hear phrases like clump of cells, or
Hmm.
it the emphasis becomes on the rights of and choices of the mother,
Hmm.
assuming that this is just some sort of mass or tumor that's growing inside of her. That, well, yeah, if it's just like a growth, then you just cut those off and you don't think about it, right? So,
Yeah.
as Scott would say, the whole thing really boils down to what is the unborn, and if you get
Hmm.
that question wrong, then or maybe just not necessarily wrong, but how you answer it is going to put you in one of two camps, likely.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is completely correct that it all comes down to that question of what is the unborn. The challenge in that is helping pro-choicers see that as the central question of the debate.
Right.
And that is what I run into all the time. In the Jubilee video I was in, where it was 30 Democrats and 30 Republicans. And basically, for those who don't know, each side would choose, there'd be a prompt, and each side would choose one champion to go debate the prompt for 10 minutes. And then they would try to reach some sort of middle ground on the topic if they could. And then that middle ground statement was then talked about amongst both sides. So thankfully, I was chosen to be the champion in that video for the pro-life side. And that's how initially I started off the conversation, of trying to frame it in that way, of that the autonomy of someone, the bodily autonomy, or just autonomy in general, is limited by the rights of other people. And so the question then becomes, well, does the fetus or does the unborn have any rights? Is it human? And so that should be the central focus of the debate, not whether women have bodily autonomy, because we all agree with that. And it shouldn't even be really, should autonomy trump your right to life, because we don't believe that in any other situation. And so really the central question is, what is the unborn?
And so then you hear people kind of red herring their way all over the place. What about, so what are the things that when you try to boil it down to that core question, what are some of the common ways you hear people just take this or that left turn to get it, off of that track?
Yeah, well, I mean, usually people agree with me, and you've got to do it in a persuasive way, and so you can do it by like asking questions. So so I do a lot of debates on TikTok as well. I'll go live from my TikTok account, and I'll just bring up random people that find my account that are scrolling on TikTok that want to debate abortion with me. And so a lot of the times, particularly in that context, basically the first argument they say is, well, the women have bodily autonomy. And so right away I ask, okay, can the women use their bodies, and let's say particularly their fists, to then beat up and kill their newborn, right? Born new baby child. Okay. No, they can't do that. Okay, so you then would agree with the statement that bodily autonomy is limited. Yes. Okay. What is it limited by? Well, because it's a human being. It's a born child. Okay, great. So the question is really, what is the thing we're dealing with, right? Mm-hmm. Is it actually a human being? Yes. Okay, great. Now, can you give me your reasons for why you don't believe the fetus is a human being? And then we can go there. And the problem is that once you move past that, which is really helpful and can get you into the meat of the discussion, you've got to hold their feet to the fire and remind them of the original conversation you had with them, because you'll press them. They'll say, oh, well, because it's not viable outside of the room, which is degree of dependency, right? Oh, right. It's dependent on the mother in some way, therefore it's not a human being. You'll press them on that, and then they'll say, well, but the women just have a right over their own body. And then
they forgot
it's hard. Yeah. It's hard to not like roll your eyes and be like, we just talked about why that's not important. And with some people, you just kind of got to keep reminding them, hold on, at the beginning, we agreed that that's not a valid argument until we find out what the fetus actually is. Right. So can you give me a different reason for why you think the fetus isn't? Oh, well, it's not conscious yet. And then they'll go, but a lot of the times I'm finding I have to like remind people of the framing of the debate over and over and over again.
Right.
Because they just so quickly forget it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's because so often the conversation is framed in any other way other than how you just articulated it. Yeah. So they're so used to thinking it in terms of bodily autonomy or consciousness or viability or size, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that too, people think about uh, the development of an embryo in terms of uh, like construction, not development. So the difference would be, um, in one sense, a car is not a car until it's fully assembled. It's just all of the
Yes.
pieces on the assembly line. But
Mm.
um,
Yes.
but that's not how it works in human development, right? Uh, and in some way, you could say you're not fully human until your brain's fully formed at 25, right?
Yeah.
But your genetic code, these kind of core markers and identifiers are there right from the beginning, regardless of if there's a fingerprint there yet, or so. But people think, well, because it's earlier, then it's somehow less human, or those sorts of things.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I love that analogy of the car. And, we aren't cars. We aren't,
Right,
you know, a car, once the car is fully developed, it is the car, right?
right.
But no, humans start off human right away.
Yeah,
And the alternative view of development, and particularly it's this view that humans are valuable because of different attributes that they hold or different things they're able to do, rather than they're valuable because they're human.
right,
That people don't realize is that they adopt that philosophy when they say things like consciousness or degree of dependency. And that underlying philosophy that humans are valuable because of certain things that they do, while the pro-choicer will say, oh, no, 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 humans are valuable because of consciousness. Well, you go back, to Nazi Germany, and they'll say, well, they're only valuable, as long as they're, white and,
right,
blue-eyed and, whatever. Or, same with America in when it comes to slavery. And so that underlying philosophy has been used to justify every major human rights abuse in
right.
all of human history. And I don't think pro-choicers realize that that's actually the philosophy they're adopting
Hmm.
when they say these
Or
things.
yeah, or even that the implication of trying to rule out the unborn as having some intrinsic value then rules out people who are born, who are maybe in certain other circumstances. So if you're in
Hmm.
a coma and you lose consciousness, you ask the question,
Yes.
okay, are they not a person anymore? And no one would say, well, no, of course not. Like they would
Right.
probably argue actually it's the opposite. Um, but that same point, when you put it to the unborn, if it has to do with an ability, or like you said, some feature, or something, then that rules out some other class of people, or if
Hmm.
they're in a certain state, right? They get in a car accident. Do they lose personhood for a few minutes when they're unconscious? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and even on that too, like there's kind of two approaches you can have with that. One, you can kind of show the implications of their view, which is like a reductio ad absurdum is like the formal name for that. But show like that their view leads to something ridiculous, and so therefore
Right.
their view must be false, right? The other approach too is just to simply ask them why, right? Like, why should we value humans that are conscious? Right? Like, why shouldn't we value humans that aren't conscious? Um, and I don't think that question's asked a lot to them because they feel like
Mm.
it's self-evident. But then when you ask them why, I don't think there's really a lot of good answers. Um, and then to follow that up with, okay, at some points there are animals that are more conscious than a newborn. So if it's consciousness that you're valuing, then why aren't you valuing the animals over the newborn, right? Like if you had to choose one to save or one to kill, you would obviously be choosing the animal to kill and the newborn to save. Why is that? It's because they're human, and that's really what you're placing your value in, right?
Right.
And so, anyways, I think those are two approaches, and both can be very effective.
And it maybe depends on the situation, but
Mm-hmm.
I do like the leading with questions and putting the burden of proof on the person who made the claim.
Yeah.
It's about consciousness. Well, why? It's
Mm.
their job to defend that view, not your job to tear it down.
Yeah.
But most of the time, we feel like it's our job to tear it down when
Yes.
actually might be more difficult for them to try to actually support their own claim, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what you're getting at. It only takes one baseball bat to hit like this little peg, and the whole thing falls down.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Start with asking questions. Don't feel like the burden of proof is always on you. It's not. Um, and you'll learn really great responses to arguments about consciousness and things like that. But sometimes in dialogue, it's best to not even bring out those arguments yet, but to just simply ask questions.
Right. So if you're watching this, make sure that you're hitting subscribe to my channel, and Mike is also streaming it to his. So hit
Yes.
subscribe there. We do want to be watching chat, and so if there's questions or comments, so here's one I want to pull up, and this is a great actually segue into just tactics, right? I find that leading questions are one of the best ways to get someone to understand exactly what they're saying and how it relates to other ideas. So let's talk about that idea of a leading question, right? Uh, that might be different than just a question to gain information. What would a leading question be in your mind, Micah?
Yeah. Well, so I would more frame it as like leading questions, right? And in one sense, like you can start off with asking clarifying questions
Right,
that then lead into harder and harder questions for them to then justify. And
right,
so this is in debate, what we call like the art of cross-ex, right? Cross-examination. And in cross-examination and debate, and this I think is generally true when it comes to like leading questions, is what you want to do is you want to basically like slowly, the analogy I use is that you want to slowly walk your opponent off to the edge of the cliff to where they don't realize that they're on the edge of a cliff because they're
right,
looking at you and smiling and they're having a good time, but everyone else watching can see what you're doing and that they're slowly walking towards the edge of the cliff. And now in debate, you have speeches and stuff, and so I say push them over the cliff in your speeches. But in more of an informal thing like on Jubilee, right, that's once they're at the edge of the cliff, just a little push is all you need, and then
right.
they're free falling, right? And so I think that's what the commenter was talking about is with
Yeah,
leading questions is you ask questions, and you get them to then eventually affirm an absurdity, and then you point that out to them and they're free falling and it's hard for them to recover from it.
right. So
Yeah.
what would be an example of using this in the context of this conversation? What would be something that you have done before to kind of lead them to the proverbial edge of the cliff of their own view? And they didn't know their view was absurd, but it was the whole time, and you kind of walked them to that point.
Yeah. I think so. There's another, and this would be a good point to bring up too. There's another conversation that can happen when you're talking about abortion, which is just the general debate about the nature of morality. And so
Mm,
I would say that if you're doing pro-life apologetics, that you should also be very well prepared to defend an objective view of morality, right? Because if morality is subjective, then abortion isn't immoral, because there is no such thing as moral and immoral. There's only things as like my feelings and how I feel about something and how I feel about an action. And so that is definitely a threat to the pro-life view. And it totally undercuts our arguments. And so I often actually end up getting into morality debates on TikTok. And so one thing when it comes to that, that I like to do when it comes to questioning. So one, as we talked about earlier, like putting the burden of proof back on them, of like, well, you know, why is morality subjective? Well, because people have different opinions on that. And, you know, people disagree on morality. Do people disagree on scientific theories? Or do people disagree on evolution? Yes. Okay. So is science subjective? Well, no. Right. And now they've fallen off the cliff because, and then you point that out to them. You give them a little push of like, okay, so if science can be objective, but still people have differing opinions, why is morality now subjective? Right. And then now they're off the cliff. Their argument is they're in free fall, right? And they don't have a response to that. And I always have found that none of them are able to really give an argument other than that people have different feelings on it, or that I feel that it's subjective. There's almost, I mean, unless you're talking to like a very smart philosopher, most people have zero arguments for why they think morality is subjective. And so that's one way, you know, I kind of have used that point. But you know, I remember talking to someone in particular who had kind of a crazy view of truth, and they just kept biting the bullets on my questions. So it was really interesting. So basically they said like something to the extent of when it comes to like a definition of truth, like, oh, what was it again exactly? Oh my gosh, I totally just drew a blank on what it was. And I even have it clipped too, and I've watched it before. But what was it? Oh yeah, it was like the majority of people believing it, right?
Oh,
so,
sure. Yeah.
Because when it comes to morality, she wants to say, oh well, the majority of people, you know, believe murder.
Yes.
Or it's wrong, right? And so the majority of people believe abortion is okay up to this amount of weeks, so therefore that's what is okay. So she had a really weird definition of truth. And so I pressed her. So I just asked her questions, right? Like, okay, what is your definition of truth? And then she gave that definition. And so I said, okay, so you believe that there's scientific truths, right? Yes. Do you believe that the earth is round? Yes. Okay. At some point in human history, did most people believe, you know, the earth was flat, or that the earth was in the center of the universe? Yes. Okay. So then was it true that the earth used to be flat when everyone believed that? And, you know, people, when you do like questions like that, there's a couple responses. They can either then backtrack and accept defeat in that argumentation and be humble about it. And people are sometimes, and they're like, yeah, you raised a good point, which is great. Other people will just bite the bullet. And this girl did not want to admit anything. And so she was like, yeah, the earth used to be flat at one point. And
Wow.
at that point, it's like, well, I'm probably not going to convince you of anything, but the audience watching, the whatever 100 or 60 people watching this live stream just
Right.
saw that your view led to this crazy conclusion. They see
Right.
you falling off the cliff. You can deny that you're falling off the cliff right now, but everyone is watching it happen right now. And so, yeah, anyways, those are just a few examples of
Yeah.
how I used questions in that way.
Well, and you can almost think of a leading question like a statement packaged as a question that you're forcing them to answer, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, you know, has the majority ever been wrong? I mean, really, that's the statement. The majority has been wrong, right?
Yeah.
But you're putting the ball in their court to
Mm,
answer the question,
yeah.
and that's kind of leading the conversation in a certain direction, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's
But
why it's like it's a leading question, and that's why I
right,
like the cliff analogy so much, because you're grabbing their hand and you're taking steps, you're leading them to the edge of a cliff, right?
right. Well, and
And
so
that's your
either they
goal.
could throw their faulty view off the edge and say I was wrong, or they're going
Yeah.
down with the view. And so that gal, she was like, you know what? Obviously, this is a crazy thing to say, but I can see what you're doing here, man. And so I'm going down with the ship. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, but some people do that, right?
Yeah.
There's kind of an unwillingness to admit that you're wrong, even on just one point.
Yeah.
Um, but you are right about the objective morality point, because uh, I'll hear people say, well, if you don't like abortions, don't have one. And it's like, this isn't about preference. This isn't like, I like
Mhm.
abortion flavored ice cream and you like pro life. That's not what this is. This is, the
Yeah.
claim is that an abortion is is murdering an innocent person. Um,
Yeah.
and uh, whether the mother knows that, certainly I think the doctor is aware of what's going on.
Hmm.
Because the mother could be as much of a victim as anyone else in this, because she's being duped and lied to, and she's
Yeah.
perhaps not being as discerning as she could be,
Hmm.
not listening to the people who are outside the clinic telling her, hey, we love you, don't do this, whatever it might
Yeah.
be. But yeah, there's just kind of a pride and unwillingness to even ask those sorts of questions.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right on track. And that's not to say that every woman is a victim, right? And
Right.
especially when you see on social media these women that tout their 30
Yep.
abortions that they've had, like
Yep.
it's something that to be proud of. And so I think obviously those women are not duped. They know what they're doing,
They know.
but they're proud of it.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's definitely, I think, some nuance, but I think on the flip side too, there are legitimately women that never see an ultrasound or don't even know truly what an abortion does, right?
Right.
They don't know what the procedure is. They don't know what it does to the fetus. They're completely unaware of it. And so, I think those women, and then they're manipulated by, these abortion clinics to proceed with it.
Right.
And so I think we can make room in our view for both legitimate victims and then also people that are fully responsible for their actions.
Right. Yeah, the shout your abortion crowd. That's different than the girl in crisis who doesn't know what to do, right? But
Absolutely.
who's just being lied to. Um, I just have so much compassion for these gals though who are duped, and then they might not know, but their body knows. And you hear people's stories of after they get an abortion, like a deep motherly sense that they did something wrong. And
Mm,
that's their conscience functioning properly.
yeah.
Uh, but the hopelessness that comes from that too, which is why the gospel is so beautiful to always go back to that. You look at Paul calling himself the chief of sinners, and so there's grace for people who have abortions. Come to the cross, go humbly, right? receive his forgiveness of sins by faith. Like there's
Mhm.
room, and that part of this conversation isn't always brought to the forefront on like a public stage.
Yeah.
Um, but that kind of thing happens all the time in like churches and one-on-one. Like there's hope-filled, grace-filled messages. It's just that I think there's this perception because from a stage, you talk about this thing or this topic differently than one-on-one with a gal who's hurting.
Mhm.
It's just not the same. I'm probably not going to go through SLED one-on-one with someone. You know, it's just going to
Mhm.
look different, especially
Yeah.
if they're experiencing regret, right? Um,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
yeah, there's so to protect the unborn, to from a public policy perspective, to fight for good legislation that aligns itself with the truth and objective morality. These are all really good things,
Yeah.
and also to just welcome in the broken or even the prideful who shout their abortions like, hey, Jesus can forgive you too.
Yeah.
So there's room for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we forget that the Apostle Paul was a murderer and hated Christians. And,
Exactly.
Jesus miraculously turns his life around. And so, if Paul, a murderer of multiple Christians, can be redeemed, then these women that do the abortions, knowing full well what they're doing, can be redeemed as well. And so,
Absolutely.
you know, we shouldn't underestimate the power of our Lord.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's healing, man.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah. So, we covered what I wanted to cover, but I wanted to just kind of go back over just briefly because we've touched on it a couple times, the sled thing. Uh,
Hmm.
would you mind just kind of walking through point by point and how you might um, emphasize or articulate each one, and we can just talk about that, what that might look like in a conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, SLED stands for size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. And so, while you often actually won't hear any of those words said in the conversation, um, those are the ideas behind it. And so, I'll kind of walk through each one and give you what I've heard, the language being used, so that when you hear that same language, red flag can go off, right? So when it comes to size, right, when it comes to uh you know size, a lot of people, the term like clump of cells will be used, right? Or it's so small, or it's just a fetus, right? And that's kind of the language that's used. This one isn't as common. It's more common to use clump of cells like as a rhetorical device, but when you push people, they'll quickly fall to another category.
Right.
um and so obviously, like, size doesn't determine your value, right? And so, you know depending on the conversation, sometimes it's appropriate to say, well, you're just a clump of cells as well. You just have a lot more cells than, the zygote, right? But you're also just a clump of cells. So what's the
Right.
point of pointing that out? Oh, well, because it's one cell. Okay. Are there single celled lives, or organisms that are alive? Well, yeah. Okay. So now you're discriminating life based off of the size that it is.
Right.
Like, is Shaquille O'Neal have greater value than me because he's much taller and bigger than I am? Well, no,
Obviously.
of course not.
Oh,
Obviously
sorry.
not. Yeah, yeah, get out of here. But no, obviously not, right? And so, pointing that out to them is good. Okay, so the next level of development. Um, so when it comes to level of development, a lot of times this is where kind of consciousness falls under. So most commonly you'll hear consciousness arguments under that. Right? They haven't developed the brains necessary to have conscious experiences. And so, again, that underlying philosophy of they have to exhibit certain features in order to be considered human. And so when it comes to level of development, right, we don't discriminate based off of development with any other humans, right? Like we don't discriminate a newborn because they're less developed than a teenager who's less developed than, you know, a 25-year-old who, you know, less developed, so on and so forth, right? And so we don't discriminate based off of that. Even though they're not fully developed, they're still a human being. And so why are we discriminating the fetus? Because they're less developed in that way, right? Shouldn't human value and human worth come from what we are? And so that's what the most common argument you'll see under level of development. Then when it comes to environment, you'll hear this too of like, well, they're not born human beings. I care about people who are born, right? That is at its core an environment argument, because they're saying, I don't care about people who are located inside the womb. I care about people who are located outside of the womb, right? And so, you know, for that one, it's just asking questions like, so why does your location determine your value and your worth, right? And it obviously doesn't. And so there's not really going to be a good argument that you'll hear against that. And so that's most commonly what environment is expressed at. And then degree of dependency, this is often referred to as viability. That's the word people will use. Well, the fetus isn't viable. And what they mean is that it can't survive outside of the womb. And so, you know, there's a lot of different aspects you can talk about with that one. One, viability is completely situation and technology dependent.
That's a great point.
And we don't really want to base human rights off of situation and technology. Hopefully we want something a little more core and essential. But like, I think down in San Diego, there was a baby who survived who was 20 weeks. And so viability just keeps, you know, extending. And so what's interesting is if you ask the people that run viability arguments, hey, if we were able to develop the technology where as soon as the woman finds out that she's pregnant, right, we could put the baby in an artificial womb and keep it alive, and so therefore it's now viable outside the mother's womb, would you now be pro-life? Well, you're going to get some people that would be like, oh yeah, absolutely, which is rare. What I've personally experienced, that's more rare. But most people are going to be like, well, no, I still think it should be the woman's choice. And then it's like, so then viability doesn't really actually mean anything to you. But then the other thing is to bring up, well, of course, we don't discriminate people based off of how dependent they are, right? And so you say we can, you know, kill the fetus because it's dependent on its mother in this way and that way, but you don't kill a newborn because it's dependent on its mother. And maybe it's less dependent on its mother. It's still pretty dependent on its mother, though. And so your line seems completely arbitrary for why that is. Or you can take someone who's at the end of their life. They're at
Yes.
the end of their life. They are completely dependent on other people. And over the past year and a half, I've had two grandpas who've had serious medical issues and have passed away. But
Mm.
seeing them at the end of their life, they were fully dependent on the nurses and my grandma to keep them alive. And so those people, are we just now, are the people taking care of them, are they allowed to, murder them, to go out and just directly kill them? Well, absolutely not, right?
Right.
And so it has nothing to do with dependency. And so that's led, and I've been talking for a while, but I'll give one more point that I think applies to all four of them. When it comes to these different things, I think a big problem with that is that it will inevitably lead to a view where some humans are more valuable than other humans, right? And so if you base human rights and human value and human worth off of something that is a spectrum, then you're going to have humans along the spectrum, and which means some humans are more valuable than others. And this is what I pushed Dean on a little bit, and I wish I had more time in the debate to kind of fully flesh this out. But with Dean's response was like, well, no, once it achieves consciousness, it's now a valuable human being. And you could even, or now it has rights, and you could even grant that. But I think analogy is helpful, right? So like, let's say I was making the argument, if you are smart, you will have, a 100 IQ. Once someone has 100 IQ, I consider them smart. That is when they have the attribute of being smart. Even if that's true, you've still put smartness on a spectrum. And so you still have people who are smarter than others. So even if that's true, Dean, that, consciousness is at this moment, you still have people that are more conscious than others, which logically would mean they are more valuable or even have more rights than other people. And that, I think, obviously morally is a huge problem for the pro-choice side. They ultimately cannot ground human rights or human value in anything that is solid or a firm foundation.
Yep.
Anyways, that was a lot of ranting, but
no,
hopefully that's
you did what I asked you to do. I appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and all of the things that you just brought up, that's why SLED is so helpful, because it brings categories to what you might hear. It kind of gives you a grid through which to listen,
Yes.
and try to find those errors. Because, like you said, if the unborn is human, then we have absolutely no right to kill it.
Yeah.
And so if you can sort of masterfully or even sloppily work your way through and get to that point. I think it was Frank Beckwith. He was talking on this topic, and I keep this in my back pocket too, so I'll just throw this one out, and then we can, start to wrap it up. But he said, imagine that there's a demolition crew, and they were charged with, before they build up the new building, they're supposed to demo the last building, right? And so they've got all the TNT in the building, and they've got the big Acme plunger far enough away, and they're ready to do this, But right at the last second, someone runs up from the building and says, hang on, there might be someone in the building, right? And so this is Frank's point. He said, would anyone in their right mind still go, and and blow the building up, right?
Yeah.
So even just creating some doubt, this was his kind of lead into this conversation. Even just creating some doubt that, like, the unborn could be fully human, fully deserving of all these rights, just creating some doubt that can start to be enough to start to topple the whole thing. And you ask the question, if it even might be a human being with rights, should we kill it? And most sane people would say, well, no, that if there's a chance there's someone in the building, you don't blow it up, right? And the building in this case is the womb. So, yeah. But just as we close, thinking through all of this, equipping the church, living faithfully, any other last tips or thoughts you want to share, Micah?
Yeah, I think when it comes to these conversations, a huge part is respect and being calm and treating your debate or the person you're debating as someone made in the image of God, just like you're advocating for the unborn. And something that's been encouraging to hear is through that Jubilee video with Dean. There were several Republicans that I think were very smart in the video, but weren't very tactful in how they debated, and were very rude and condescending towards Dean. And that immediately is going to shut people down. And even if you make a good point, they're not going to really listen to it because you've insulted them. And a lot of feedback I've received from that video, and from not just Republicans, but from Democrats, have been, hey, I totally disagree with your views, but thank you so much for being respectful in your conversation. You really got me thinking about this. And so, that's what we want to do. And so we want to be respectful so that we can open the door to, what we at Maven, my dad's ministry, we call, putting a stone in someone's shoe, of just giving them something to think about that will bug them, that they'll eventually have to, take off their shoe and deal with it. You want to give them an argument to where they're thinking through it and they eventually have to deal with it. And that's just not possible if you're disrespectful. And so I think when it comes to this, I love being passionate about this issue. It is a great human tragedy, but we've got to be respectful when it comes to it. And we can't be demeaning towards the other side.
Good word. Appreciate that. Well, if you've been watching this, want to just encourage you to share it, subscribe, all of the YouTuber things you're supposed to say, do all of that stuff. And we're just so grateful to have you join us here. Thank you to Micah. I'm so grateful for you. And you can always expect a text from me when I see another video pop off. I'm like, oh man, here we go. Let's go, man. It's good. So I'm grateful for how God's using you. So we'll look forward to more of that. That's good stuff. All right.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah. All right. And your parents are going to be here in a couple months for our Bible conference. So
that's right.
I'm hanging out with the Kunkles, man. It's good. All right.
Well, sorry you have to hang out with my dad, but that's awesome to hang out with my mom.
Yeah. Oh, funny. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.